Hey everybody, Jim here with another video for you. This is 50 Years in Film, 1988. But before we begin, if you like this video, if you like this channel, if you like the content, please leave a thumbs up at the end, possibly subscribe, and most especially, please leave comments. I would really love to hear from you. Now, as usual, I want to mention the usual caveat that these are not all of the films from 1988, far from it. These are simply the titles that I own on Blu-ray. I also own many other titles from this year on DVD, but they will not be included on this video. 1988 to me is kind of like 83. It's underwhelming as a whole, but when it shines very bright. There are some truly iconic titles in this year. So we're going to jump in like we always do. We're going to start off different genres. We're going to start off with the comedies. We're going to start off with one of the biggest hits of that year and one of the most influential movies of the last 25 to 30 years. And that is Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Directed by Robert Zemeckis. This is truly an incredible movie. It inspired Space Jam, Looney Tunes Back in Action, and countless others. But this is definitely the best. And at the time, it was just thrilling to see all the Disney animated characters and all the Looney Tunes characters interact together. It was something that I never thought I would ever see. And it was done just masterfully in this movie. I love Roger Rabbit. The next comedy, I'm Gonna Get You Sucker. This is a Kino title, written and directed by Keenen Ivory Wayans, who also stars. This is a blaxploitation parody comedy. And again, like Roger Rabbit, this was also a very influential movie. This definitely influenced Black Dynamite, which I covered on one of my 5 films to check out. This is a very funny movie. Very stupid, very silly, but very funny. Next, from Shout Select, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, starring Steve Martin, Michael Caine, and directed by Frank Oz. This is also a remake. Great movie. There's a scene with Steve Martin in this movie that just, every time I see it, I just howl with laughter. This is a very good movie. But this might possibly be my favorite movie from the entire year. Midnight Run, starring Robert De Niro, Charles Grodin, Dennis Farina, and a cast of many others. This movie is excellent. It is one of the best movies of the 80s. It's one of my favorite Robert De Niro movies. This was directed by Martin Brest, who also directed Son of a Woman. This is just perfection. The musical score by Danny Elfman is great. If you've never seen Midnight Run, do yourself a favor. Watch this movie. It is so entertaining. Now we're going into the dramas. And we're going to start with Martin Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ. This was a very controversial film when it came out. So much so that the theater chain that I worked at, which had 8 different theaters, 2 outdoors, for a total of about 50 screens, they could not show this movie on any of them because they were worried about people picketing. And they were picketing this movie before the movie even came out because of some bogus information that they received, and this was before the internet, about how this movie was going to be the most sacrilegious thing ever. And quite frankly, this movie is excellent. William Dafoe is great as Jesus. Most people prefer The Passion of the Christ. To me, this movie hit closer to home for me. I love this movie. Then we go from Jesus, unfortunately, to Street Gangs. Sorry, I couldn't come up with a good segue for that. But we have Colors, directed by Dennis Hopper, starring Sean Penn, Robert Duvall, and Maria Conchita Alonso. This is a very good movie. It's a little far-fetched as far as the makeups of the gangs and such. You know, it's very Hollywoodized, but it's still a very, very good movie. Excellent performances across the board. Now we're venturing more into the action, and we have Shakedown with Peter Weller, Sam Elliott, and you know it's coming, Sam Elliott's mustache. I mean, look at that thing. This was written and directed by James Glickenhaus, who also did The Soldier, The Exterminator, and a bunch of B movies. This was like his biggest budgeted studio movie, and it shows. It's a very solid movie. It's not going to win any awards, but it is very entertaining, and the two of them play off each other extremely well. And then we go to Clint Eastwood in the final installment of the Dirty Harry series, The Deadpool. Co-starring a very young Liam Neeson and Jim Carrey playing a rock and roll star modeled after Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses. As a matter of fact, the rest of the band at the time show up in a music video for this movie. And it's Welcome to the Jungle, with Jim Carrey lip-syncing Welcome to the Jungle. This is an entertaining movie, but quite frankly, out of the 5 Dirty Harry movies, this one is my least favorite. Now we're going to go into some war action, and we have Bat 21 with Gene Hackman and Danny Glover. Very solid Vietnam movie. I'm not sure if this is based on a true event or not, but it is. It's a very solid movie. Flew under the radar that year. And Gene Hackman and Danny Glover are absolutely fantastic in this movie. And then we go to He's Back. Nope, not that one. That one. Now, I've never understood why this movie's called Rambo 3. It should be called Rambo First Blood Part 3, but that's schematics. This was the highest budgeted movie in history at the time. The budget was around $65 million, which nowadays would be a mid-budget action movie. But at the time in 1987, when this was being filmed, that seemed astronomical for an action movie. The main reason why it was so high was because First Blood 2 was such a big hit. This is basically the movie with revisionist history looking at it as Stallone and the Taliban fight the Russians. I do like this movie. It has not aged well. It has not aged well at all as far as the politics go. However, like Rambo 2 and the next installment, it's a very entertaining cartoon. Speaking of entertaining cartoons, we have Walter Hill's Red Heat, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jim Belushi. Schwarzenegger is a Russian cop who comes to America looking for a drug smuggler, played by Edo Ross. Entertaining movie. Not great, but entertaining. Anytime you've got Schwarzenegger and Walter Hill together, you're going to be entertained. But the truly iconic action movie that was released that year was Die Hard. This movie was not considered at all with projections to be a hit. This was more or less considered to be, they thought it was going to be a huge flop. When people found out that Bruce Willis got paid $5 million to star in this movie, people openly made fun of him. Johnny Carson made fun of it on The Tonight Show before this movie came out. And when it came out, every critic in America shut their mouths and said, you know what? John McTiernan has directed a modern action masterpiece. Just about every action movie for the next 20 years after this one, you could say, was inspired by Die Hard. Some of them are quite obvious. Speed, Die Hard on a bus. Snakes on a plane, Die Hard on a plane. Die Hard is a masterpiece in the action genre, and it catapulted Bruce Willis from a TV star to a movie superstar. Okay, now we're switching into the horror, guys. We're going to go with a little under the radar film called Jack's Back, starring James Spader and directed by Rowdy Harrington, who also directed Roadhouse, which comes out next year, and we'll have a story about Roadhouse next year. But this is basically a Jack the Ripper type story. It's definitely inspired by Jack the Ripper, but in the modern day. Not scary, it's more of a suspense drama, but James Spader is very good as always. The next suspense film, and again, I would not call this scary, Monkey Shines, directed by George Romero, starring, and I can never pronounce his name, I believe it's Jason Beggy, and John Padcow from To Live and Die in LA. This is a really good movie. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's also very entertaining. And again, it's not scary. It's more of a suspense drama. Continuing in that vein, Dead Ringers, directed by David Cronenberg and starring Jeremy Irons in one of the greatest performances ever, in my opinion. He won all the Critics' Awards that year for Best Actor, but when the nominations for the Academy Awards came out that year, he wasn't even nominated. Then the following year, he made a movie called Reversal of Fortune, where he played Klaus von Bülow. He not only was nominated for that, but he won for that, for Best Actor. When he went up to the Academy speech, or to claim his Oscar, the first line out of his speech was, "Before I begin, I'd like to thank David Cronenberg," because he truly feels that if it wasn't for this movie, he never would have won that Oscar the following year. This movie's not great, but Jeremy Irons is in that movie. Next, we have Wes Craven's The Serpent and the Rainbow. This is my Scream Factory Blu-ray. That's the original one sheet. Starring Bill Pullman in what I think is his best performance. This is a very underrated movie in my opinion, but I know that a lot of people do disagree with me. This is a very divisive film, as are most of Wes Craven's films. But I've always really liked this movie. It's not scary, but it's always invoked a sense of dread. And the final act falls apart. I will not argue that the last 20 minutes of this movie is pretty bad. But I love the tension that is built up until that point. Then we've got Child's Play. That's the original one sheet. For a killer doll movie, Child's Play is actually pretty cool. I remember at the time being really impressed with it. A lot of that has to do with the direction from Tom Holland, who also directed Fright Night. But Brad Dourif is perfect as the voice of Chucky. He really is. And I had no idea at the time that this movie would inspire, 7 sequels? But yeah, the first Child's Play it's a great movie. Okay, now we're going to go into a couple of my steel books. First from Stan Winston, effects man extraordinaire. He directed this movie, Pumpkinhead, starring Lance Henriksen. I love that steelbook. And the colors on that steelbook's great. But I like this movie. It's solid. It's not great. I more or less got this because of this steelbook. But I do like Pumpkinhead. It is a very entertaining movie. Same thing with this. Their Scream Factory steelbook, Night of the Demons. I like this movie even less than Pumpkinhead because I do like Pumpkinhead quite a bit. This movie, it's all right, but I do like the steelbook. So, and I know most people absolutely love Night of the Demons, and I get it. I do understand. Linnea Quigley, I love Linnea Quigley just as much as the next guy. Night of the Demons is fun. It is. And then we've got, Waxwork. I definitely preferred this movie more back in the 80s. I recently bought this within the last couple of months, and I watched both of them, and this one's still entertaining. Second movie, I'm sorry, sucks. But Waxwork, it's David Warner, so of course, anything with David Warner is great. I wouldn't call Waxwork great, but David Warner is. Next, Bad Dreams. This is more or less a Freddy Krueger movie without Freddy Krueger. But it's got a great cast. With Jennifer Rubin, who was in Dream Warriors, Bruce Abbott from Reanimator, but especially Richard Lynch. He plays the Freddy Krueger part. And not a classic movie, but it is entertaining. It's the reason why I bought this collection in the first place. Now we're getting into the sequels and remakes. First, Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, a.k.a. Jason versus Carrie, because that's what I've called it since the first time I've seen it. And it is literally that. There's Carrie right there with blonde hair. But you know what? As ridiculously goofy as this movie is, it is entertaining. And it still contains my absolute favorite kill in the entire series. You know which one I'm talking about. And if you don't, wait until Jason X, where they recreate it, kind of, on the holodeck. And then, here it comes. I'm sorry, I gotta do it again. Boy! Phantasm 2. Written and directed by Don Coscarelli. And just like the first movie, this movie is absolutely batshit crazy. I love this movie. Reggie Bannister, who plays Reggie, the ice cream man, is so goddamn funny in this movie. When he gets into a chainsaw fight with a guy, yells, "Come on, you mother!" And then the guy pulls out a chainsaw 3 times his size. That was one of the best reactions from that summer, because unfortunately this movie was a flop. But I do remember the first showing was packed, and that moment got a huge laugh. And I love Phantasm 2. It's my favorite in the entire series. Another sequel, Hellbound, Hellraiser 2. This is from my Scarlet Box set, as was, well, if you watched the last video, you saw that. I actually prefer this one to Hellraiser. Hellraiser is a better movie, don't get me wrong. I think this one's a more entertaining movie. The scope on it's bigger. Unfortunately, they ran out of money before they could finish it, because they did have a much bigger idea of hell in mind. But even constrained with the lower budget, I really, really enjoy this movie. But the last two are both science fiction based. One is horror, one isn't. But we're starting off with Chuck Russell's The Blob. part of the holy trinity of 80s sci-fi remakes. The other two being The Thing and The Fly. And The Blob certainly stands shoulder to shoulder with those two movies. It is not as good as those two movies, don't get me wrong. Those two movies are masterpieces. This is not. This is a B-movie masterpiece, because my God, is this movie fun. Look at Kevin Dillon's mullet. Oh, it's frightening. The Blob, like so many other movies in the 80s, 1,000 times better than it has any right to be. The original Blob with Steve McQueen's a classic, but it's ridiculous. This movie is not ridiculous. This movie's actually kind of scary. The effects hold up. The performances hold up. The Blob is a great, great, great movie. But we saved this one for last. And it is not horror. Unless you're looking at it from a certain point of view. We're talking about John Carpenter's They Live, starring Roddy Piper. This movie's just, it's incredible. When this movie came out, it was a flop. It did really well the first week, and then it just tailed off significantly. I loved it from the beginning. But the main complaint was all this movie is it's just picking on the Reagan years, because this was right towards the end of the Reagan years. And my argument to that was, truth hurts, don't it? But unfortunately, this truth hurts as well. Jump forward 25, 30 years, nothing's changed. If anything, things have gotten worse. And sometimes I do feel like this universe that John Carpenter created in this movie actually exists. And I'm just looking for the sunglasses to put on so I could see it for what it really is. They Live is an incredible film. It's gained cult status through the years to now it's finally being recognized, like The Thing, as being the masterpieces that they are. I absolutely love this movie, and I always will. That's the end for this year, guys. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. I hope I didn't bore you too much. If you like this, please, again, hit that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and most importantly of all, please give me comments. I can only get better at this with your feedback, so please, I look forward to hearing from you, and have a great night.